gorgeous husband, a beautiful house, a great job, and the most amazing part of it all, a baby on the way. But then our lives got flipped upside down when the hospital told us something that made us question every single thing that we knew about ourselves. Our relationship had happened so quickly. We met in college, fell in love almost immediately, and as soon as we graduated, we got married, and surprise, surprise, on our honeymoon, we fell pregnant. So we were over the moon when we went for our first scan, but it didn't go to plan. You see, at our second scan at 6 months, the doctor told us our precious little baby was developing abnormally and that it looked like they'd be born with a defect called polydactyly. This meant our baby would have 6 toes. We were devastated, but this was our first baby, and we would love it no matter what. When the doctor delivered the news, he was looking at us weirdly, and then he asked us if anyone in our family had this defect, but of course, no one had this. He then said these things happen sometimes and not to worry about it. I tried not to think about the defect throughout the rest of the pregnancy. When our baby was born, it was the happiest day of my life. And the defect was just tiny. She was born with 6 toes on her left foot. It was barely even noticeable. A year later, I fell pregnant again. And by this point, we'd moved to another city as my husband got a new job. So when we went for our scan at the new hospital, I was a little nervous because it was also the 6-month scan. I couldn't believe it. The doctor looked at the scan, frowned, and then anxiously coughed as he told us the baby would be born with 6 toes. I told him our first child had the same defect and asked why this had happened again. Then he turned to us and said, "I don't mean to pry, but is there any possible way that you two could be related?" My jaw dropped. What did he mean? Of course we weren't related. I was so upset I ran out of there. It's one thing to be told that your unborn baby has a defect, but then to have the cheek to ask if my husband was related to me? How could this baby also have a defect? Was there something wrong with me? Why did this doctor think we were related? I mean, it was impossible. I tried to ignore it, but this time it had really got under my skin, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I decided I had to speak to my parents. I called them up and told them we needed to talk. Then, the next week, we drove over there to stay for the weekend. I told them everything the doctor had said. My mom comforted me and said that was very unprofessional of the doctors, and that these things just happen and that I shouldn't worry. But my dad looked a little anxious. He was shifting in his seat and said he needed to go use the bathroom. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I was in the kitchen eating a packet of chips. The pregnancy cravings were unreal. I had just shoved a big handful into my mouth when my dad came into the kitchen and said he had something to tell me. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He was so pale. "What's wrong, Dad?" I asked, worried. "Well, it's complicated, sweetie," he said, and then he explained. Before he'd met Mom, he'd been broke. He wanted to buy a car, but he couldn't afford it, so he'd seen an ad in the newspaper for a sperm bank. They were looking for sperm donors, and he donated his sperm. My dad hadn't thought about it since, until now. He couldn't help but wonder if my husband was actually his son. I stood there, shocked. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much they looked alike. My friends had made jokes that I'd chosen a guy who was identical to my dad, but I'd just laughed it off. I mean, sure, they were both tall, dark, and handsome, but so were so many other men. My dad then advised us to do a paternity test to find out for sure. Telling my husband was really hard. I couldn't wait until the next morning, so I woke him up, and he couldn't believe it. He'd always known his dad was an anonymous sperm donor. His mom didn't want to get married, but really wanted to become a mom. She had never lied to him about this, but never in a million years did he think it could have been my dad. I mean, his mom had never met the donor, so she never knew either. Well, we took the test, and the results were shocking. My dad was indeed his dad, too. I felt like our lives were over. No wonder our baby had 6 toes, and now we had another baby on the way with 6 toes, too. We then had to break the news to my husband's mom, and she was so disturbed by it. She asked if we were going to divorce. No, that was the last thing we wanted. We decided to stay together, but after this baby, we wouldn't have any more, as it wasn't fair on the baby to be born with a defect. Now we have 2 babies who are healthy, except for their 6 toes, and we are keeping it a secret. We love each other, and even though we are blood related, it's not our fault. I mean, it's not like we knew. It's been hard for my parents and my husband's mom, but they've come to terms with it, and hopefully now we can all move forward. What do you think of my story? Please share your comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories.